Keel hauling. Keel hauling was a punishment used aboard ships, especially in European navies during the Age of Sail. A sailor accused of serious offenses, such as mutiny or desertion, was tied to ropes on either side of the vessel. The sailor was then dragged underwater, down one side of the ship, beneath the keel, and back up the other side. The keel of wooden ships was often covered in barnacles and sharp growth, which tore at the skin during the pull. Many sailors drowned during the process, and those who survived often suffered severe wounds or infection afterward. Because it required an entire crew and a functioning ship, keel hauling was also a public display, meant to remind every sailor aboard what defiance could cost. Drawing and quartering. Drawing and quartering was one of the most severe punishments in English legal history. Reserved for the crime of high treason, the condemned was first dragged or drawn through the streets tied to a wooden frame pulled by a horse, allowing the public to witness the punishment before it began. At the execution site, the prisoner was hanged, but cut down while still alive. The body was then disemboweled, and in many cases, the internal organs were burned in front of the prisoner. Finally, the body was cut into 4 parts, or quarters, which were often displayed in different locations as a warning to others. This punishment was designed not just to kill, but to erase the idea that anyone could challenge the crown and survive the consequence. Bastinado. Bastinado is a punishment involving repeated blows to the soles of the feet, historically used across the Middle East, Asia, and parts of Europe. The victim's feet were typically bound and raised, exposing the soles to direct strikes from a rod or cane. The feet contain a dense network of nerve endings, making this method especially painful despite leaving few visible wounds elsewhere on the body. Because the injuries were often internal, such as damaged tissue and bone, bastinado could disable a person for walking without leaving obvious signs of torture. This made it a preferred method in judicial and prison settings where officials wanted to punish or extract confessions without visible evidence of abuse. Strappado. Strappado is a method of restraint torture that dates back to medieval Europe and was later used extensively during the witch trials of the Inquisition. The victim's hands were bound behind their back, and a rope attached to the wrists was thrown over a beam or pulley. The victim was then hoisted into the air by the wrists, forcing the arms upward and behind the body at an unnatural angle. This position placed extreme pressure on the shoulder joints, often resulting in dislocation. In more severe versions, weights were attached to the victim's feet, or the body was dropped partway and abruptly stopped, intensifying the strain on the joints. Strappado was frequently used to extract confessions, as the pain could be increased or decreased at will, making it an effective tool for coercion over time. Sleep deprivation. Unlike most methods on this list, sleep deprivation torture leaves no physical marks, but it can break down the mind just as effectively. Victims were kept awake for extended periods, sometimes for several days in a row, through noise, bright light, or forced physical activity. As sleep deprivation continues, the brain begins to lose the ability to regulate emotion, memory, and basic decision-making. Prolonged deprivation can produce hallucinations, paranoia, and a state resembling psychosis, making victims more likely to say whatever their captors want to hear. Because it leaves no visible evidence, this method has historically been used in interrogation settings where officials wanted to avoid the appearance of physical abuse. Waterboarding. Waterboarding is an interrogation method designed to simulate the sensation of drowning without technically submerging the victim. The victim is restrained, usually lying on their back, with the head tilted downward, and a cloth is placed over the face. Water is then poured over the cloth, which triggers the body's natural gag and drowning reflex, even though the lungs may not actually fill with water. This reflex produces intense panic, as the body's survival instincts respond as if death by drowning is imminent. Historical and modern use of waterboarding has centered on interrogation rather than punishment, intended to break a subject's resistance through repeated psychological trauma rather than direct physical injury. Flaying. Flaying is the act of removing skin from the body, and it stands among the most extreme forms of punishment recorded in ancient history. Historical records describe flaying being used by several ancient civilizations, often reserved for crimes considered a direct betrayal of the state. such as treason or severe corruption. In some documented cases, the skin was removed while the victim was still alive, and the process was carried out slowly to prolong the punishment. In certain instances, the removed skin was displayed publicly, sometimes draped over a chair or wall, as a permanent warning to officials who might consider similar crimes. Because flaying was so extreme, it was rarely used for ordinary criminals, and its purpose was almost always symbolic, as much as punitive, meant to demonstrate absolute state authority. Buried alive. Being buried alive has appeared throughout history as both a method of execution and a documented method of torture. In some historical legal systems, this punishment was specifically reserved for certain crimes, including specific religious or moral offenses under particular legal codes. The condemned was placed in a pit or confined space and covered with earth while still conscious, sometimes left with only enough air to survive for a short period. In documented cases, victims were buried with limited access to air, which meant death came gradually rather than immediately. The psychological terror of the method was considered part of the punishment itself, as the condemned remained aware of their situation throughout the process. Because it required no weapon and left the body largely intact, burial alive was sometimes chosen specifically for how slow and inescapable it was. Impalement. Impalement is one of the oldest forms of execution recorded in history, used across several ancient and medieval civilizations as both punishment and warning. The condemned was pierced through the body with a long stake, which was then raised upright, leaving the victim exposed in public view. Depending on the method, death could come within minutes or could stretch on for hours, as the stake avoided vital organs in some historical accounts, specifically to prolong suffering. Rulers throughout history used impalement not just to punish an individual, but to display the consequences of rebellion or invasion to an entire population. Fields of impaled bodies left along roads or borders served as a psychological weapon, meant to discourage opposing armies or rebellious subjects before conflict even began. Scaphism. Scaphism is one of the most extreme forms of torture described in ancient historical accounts, most famously associated with ancient Persia. According to these accounts, the victim was placed inside a hollowed-out structure, such as a boat or trough, with only the head, hands, and feet left exposed. The victim was then force-fed milk and honey, while more honey was smeared across the exposed skin to attract insects. Left in this state under the sun for an extended period, the victim would suffer from insect infestation and infection over the course of days. Historians debate how accurately these ancient accounts reflect what actually happened, since the surviving descriptions come from limited historical sources written long after the events they describe. Regardless of the historical accuracy, scaphism has endured for centuries as one of the most disturbing punishments ever recorded.